In this video, we're going to take a look at different parts of a research report, or what we call a research manuscript. This is traditionally what we write when we are going to report the findings of a research study that we're doing. Remember that there's a process between writing the actual report or manuscript to it becoming a journal article. And so we write a manuscript, formatting it according to the American Psychological Association's guidelines that will go through peer review once we submit it to an academic journal, and then they will reformat it into the format for their particular journal. In this video, the example we're going to be using is a study that I conducted of the My Student Body Obesity Prevention Program among college students. This was published in the American Journal of College Health back in 2012. The first page of a manuscript will always be the title page. The title page will have a running head, which is usually an abbreviated version of the title of the manuscript. The page numbers will also be in the header, and then there'll be the title of the manuscript, the author or authors, and the affiliation for each one of the authors, as well as the date in which the manuscript was submitted. You can get information on how to format the title page in the APA manual. The next section is the abstract, and the abstract is a summary of what you did, why you did it, and what you found. It's generally 250 words or less, and you'll see in the journal articles that you read, it should provide an overall summary of what you found. In general, we never put any statistic notation, including t-scores, Pearson correlation coefficients, significance level, sample size, degrees of freedom in the abstract. Additionally, we never cite anything in the abstract itself. You can get more information on how to format an abstract in the APA manual. The next section of a manuscript is typically called the literature review or the introduction. What we want to do in the literature review is we want to synthesize what is currently known and what is not known about that topic. So we want to go as far back as perhaps 7 and 8 years and look at everything that has been done on that particular topic. You also want to make sure that when you're writing your literature review that you are forming an argument. A good way to think about this is as you are prosecuting somebody for murder and you have to prove that they committed the murder in front of a jury. So you want to have a main point or an argument, and then you want to support that main point with evidence from the existing literature. Typically, a literature review will have an introduction, body, and a conclusion. So that's how we organize our literature review, with an introduction, body, and conclusion. What a literature review should not do is simply list all of the articles that you read and summarize each article individually. Another thing you don't want to do in a literature review is provide idiosyncratic or specific information. So for example, you don't want to put down all the types of information in a particular study. You simply want to synthesize and summarize it. So in terms of the organization of a literature review, you're going to have an introduction, which is generally 1 paragraph, although it could be 2 paragraphs. You're going to have a body, which will be anywhere between 3 and 5 paragraphs. And you'll have a conclusion, which will be usually 1 paragraph, sometimes 2 paragraphs. So a nice literature review in a basic manuscript will have 1 paragraph for an introduction, 3 to 5 paragraphs for the body, and 1 paragraph for the conclusion. Obviously, if you're writing a much more in-depth document like a thesis or a dissertation, this might be more than one paragraph. So for example, your introduction may be 3 to 4 pages, your body may be 7 to 10 pages, your conclusion may be 4 to 5 pages, each consisting of multiple paragraphs. But typically in a manuscript, in a research report, we'll have 1 paragraph introduction, 3 to 5 paragraphs in the body, and 1 paragraph in the conclusion. Make sure that you're providing a rationale for your conducting the study. When I read a literature review, I want to see what is the argument or rationale the writer's trying to make. Make sure that you identify all the seminal work that has been done before. You would hate to not include a specific study or a series of studies from some major players in that field. Again, think of this as presenting an argument and you're trying to support your research question or your hypothesis. And it's also important that somewhere in the conclusion section of your literature review that you state the purpose of your study. So let's take a look at the article I wrote on the My Student Body program. You can see starting on line 25, going all the way to line 44 here, you can see this is the introductory paragraph. And what I do in that introductory paragraph is I talk about obesity as a problem, specifically among college students, and I got that information from an article. And then notice what I do now is talk about why obesity is a problem. So I talk about nutrition and exercise behaviors. Then I go on to talk about the consequences of those behaviors as well as obesity. Then another thing that I do is I introduce the fact that college students, or doing programs among college students, is important because they affect them later on in life. One thing that I want to make sure that you're clear on is this particular journal requires MLA style, where there's a subscript number that represents the article that's being cited. Again, this particular journal article is not APA style. So I've got the introductory paragraph. And then what I've done is I have 3 main points that I want to make to my argument. And these are represented in each of these 3 paragraphs. So the first point that I'm going to make when I read a number of different articles is what's traditionally been done in school-based or college-based obesity prevention programs. So I had read a number of articles looking at the different ways that in general in the last 10 years people have approached college-based obesity prevention programs. And so based on the information I got from these 3 articles, 14, 15, and 16, I came away with this particular conclusion. So what I'm doing is I'm paraphrasing what I found in these 3 articles into this one sentence. And then what I did is I found out that based on all of those articles that I read, that the existing literature suggests that many of these obesity prevention efforts aren't really effective. So that's the first subpoint that I'm making. So while there's been a number of different curriculums or programs, intervention has been done, for many of these articles, they haven't been effective. And so now what I do here in line 50 that starts with, for example, I'm providing some evidence to support that argument that I'm making. The argument that existing peer-reviewed literature suggests that many of these efforts have little or no impact on student behaviors or weight loss. So the evidence that I'm giving comes from the Heverett et al. Study, where they found that there was hardly any change in physical activity levels. And then notice what I do here on line 56 is I provide another piece of evidence to support that point. Again, all of this evidence is coming from the peer-reviewed literature. I'm paraphrasing what I read and citing it. And then the last sentence of any paragraph is going to be a concluding sentence. And so here I put, as a result, there's a need for effective obesity prevention programs aimed at college students to decrease current epidemiological rates. So what I've done in this first paragraph is I've made a sub-argument. I provided 2 pieces of information to support that argument and then restated my argument in the conclusion section. In the next paragraph, what I'm doing is discussing specifically online or internet-based interventions for college students. So notice how I've organized this literature review. I start from the very, very broad, and now I'm getting more specific. So at first I started with just obesity is a problem. Here's what we know about obesity, why it's caused, and why we should address this in the college years. The second paragraph, starting on line 45, what I've done is talk about, now I'm getting more narrow here, is talking about approaches to preventing obesity among college students. Now, starting on line 63 here, the use of internet-based interventions, now what I'm doing is I'm getting even more specific, looking at online or internet-based interventions. So I read a bunch of articles looking at internet-based interventions for college students, those that have been done for drug prevention, obesity prevention, alcohol prevention. And now what I'm going to do is summarize the information I got in articles 19, 20, and 21. So all of this information that I got in this first sentence is summarizing and synthesizing information from articles 19, 20, and 21. And then I present my sub-argument. Past research points to the potential for efficacy for internet-based programs. And look what I do here. I use this transitional phrase, for example, to let my reader know, here comes some supporting evidence. So I talk about a meta-analysis that was done that showed that it affects both the frequency and quantity of alcohol consumption. And then what I do is I provide some more information about the effectiveness of internet-based prevention programs. Now, in this fourth paragraph, what I do is look more specifically at internet-based programs looking at alcohol and drug use, and now transition into nutrition and physical activity. So I looked at the Gao article, I looked at some other articles looking at what's known and not known about obesity prevention programs that are conducted online or through the internet, and the effectiveness of each of those. In the bottom of that paragraph, now I explicitly state my hypothesis, which is to look at the effect of the My Student Body program compared to a control group and a regular group. After that literature review, you're going to go straight in to your method section. Your method section should first begin with a description of your sample. How did you recruit them? What was your sampling technique? Did you use a random sample, a convenient sample, cluster sampling? How did you sample them from the population? Additionally, another thing you want to do in your method section is talk about how you got the participants' consent and have a statement there looking at or explicitly stating that the study was reviewed and approved by the Institutional Review Board. So down at the bottom I write, this study was reviewed and approved by the Institutional Review Board. In the next paragraph of the method section, then you want to address what type of design did you use. Did you use a correlational design, experimental design? You also want to talk about how the data was collected. Did you use a focus group, questionnaires? Was there a survey delivered online? Was a survey done during kids' classroom period? How did you collect the data? You also want to talk about where the data was collected. It's very, very important that in that section of the method section that you give your reader enough information so that they can replicate your study. So they know the type of design that you did, how you gained consent, how you recruited participants. It's almost like a recipe. In the third paragraph, then you want to discuss what your data collection tools were. Typically, we're going to be collecting data with surveys or questionnaires. So you can see in the article, I talk about that I had a number of different variables that I was collecting data on. Exercise self-efficacy, self-efficacy to consume fruits and vegetables, exercise behaviors. So what I've done is I've told the reader where I got that scale, so where I got the exercise self-efficacy scale, and then I've given them a general idea of what that scale asks, so that it's an 18-item scale. For example, one of the stems is, can I exercise even when I am feeling tired, and how people respond to that particular item or to that scale. And then I've provided some psychometric data regarding the scale's internal consistency, or what we call reliability. I got this information from that article number 25. And you can see I've done that with all of the other items on my survey, including the behavioral items as well. Make sure that when you're describing your measures that you give your reader information on where you obtain the measures, as well as any of the psychometric information that they need, particularly reliability. The next section of the manuscript will be your results. In general, we make two different sections of our results. The first paragraph or section will simply be the characteristics of the sample. You're just going to describe what the sample is, what proportion were male and female, what was their race, what percent of the students were in middle school or high school. You also may want to develop a demographics table that you'll put behind your references, and you can refer to that in the paragraph itself. In this paragraph, we also might do any preliminary analyses, looking at baseline equivalence or looking at how we handled missing data. So we want to address what we did to look at the assumptions for a statistical test or any preliminary analyses that we've conducted. In the next paragraph in the results section, this is really the heart of the manuscript. That's what did you find when you did your analyses. You're going to want to use the Cronk text to help you write your results section. In general, when we write a results section, we tell the reader what we're doing, what we're testing, the independent variable and the dependent variable. We tell them exactly what statistical test that we use for that particular test of that particular hypothesis. And then we tell them the results of that statistical test, including the test statistic, the degrees of freedom or sample size, and the exact probability that the effect was due to random variation. Make sure that you use both the Cronk text and the APA manual to help you format your results section. Another thing that's important too is that you have tables and figures as well. So you might have one table that is your demographics table. You might have another table, let's say, that shows the mean scores of your study variables. The next section of your paper will be the discussion section, and this is where you want to first summarize what you found in the first paragraph. So you're just going to reiterate in a different way what you found and why that's important. In the next couple of paragraphs, you're going to want to place the results of your current study in the context of what's known about that topic. Specifically, you want to address the extent to which the results of your study are consistent or inconsistent with previous research. Now, it's important that you only do this with the articles that you cited in your introduction or literature review section. In another paragraph, you want to discuss the strengths and limitations of your study. So you need to be able to identify what are the strengths and limitations of the study, and this needs to be accurate. One thing that new writers will do is just list limitations of strengths in general of all studies, and they do not apply to their particular study. Make sure the strengths and limitations of your study are germane to your particular study. In subsequent paragraphs, I think it's also a good idea to discuss the implications for future research or practice in that field. So you may have a paragraph on policy implications and a paragraph on programmatic implications. It might also be a good idea to talk about what the next step should be. So in order to more fully understand what you've looked at, it may be good to talk about what future research should examine. So what you can see in my article, you can see I have a concluding paragraph. I also have a discussion on the limitations and strengths, and then I also here talk about programmatic and policy implications as well. This is one of the most important sections to write because this gives you an opportunity to really impact your profession. Right after the discussion or conclusion section, you're going to then have your reference page. Make sure you only reference those articles that you cite in your paper itself. The APA manual will tell you exactly how to format each and every one of your citations. Remember, don't reference anything that hasn't been cited or paraphrased in your paper. Just some common rules and advice about writing. The APA manual says don't begin a sentence with a number, so make sure you use words to express those. Make sure you spell out acronyms, their first use. Try to write in an active voice rather than a passive voice. Omit needless words. You're not going to have a lot of room to write. In fact, many report guidelines or journals limit the amount that you can write. So for example, the American Journal of Public Health, you can't have any more than 12,500 words. So you need to make sure you omit needless words. Make sure you reference everything that is not your own idea or concept or words. What you want to do is paraphrase and then cite. Be aware of parallel verbs. Watch out for split infinitives. Never quote unless it's absolutely necessary. If you do quote, make sure you have an accurate quote and you cite it appropriately. In general, quoting is very bad form. When we quote something directly from a source, what that's telling our reader is that we really don't understand what that person is saying or the significance of it, so we're just going to copy it word for word and let the reader figure it out. You want to paraphrase other people's ideas or words to make your argument and then cite them accordingly. Make sure you have a structure for your literature review. Make it organized. So for example, I went from general to specific. Have a structure. Make it logical and make it easy to follow. Remember correct punctuation, particularly after quotation marks. Never use contractions. And always remember the process of writing, which is write, proofread, and rewrite. And then you may need to proofread again and then rewrite again. It's very important that you have anything that you write proofread by another individual. Another tip would simply just to be to read your report out loud, because oftentimes when we read it out loud, we can catch many mistakes. Make sure you look at having somebody proofreading your work as something that's actually very, very helpful. And you really want people to be critical of your work, both the format as well as the content. As always, if you have any questions, make sure that you come by during my office hours.